in India, right? And I say that, okay, sure, add $200 to all the accounts in my databases, and that database, blah, 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 routes over back to somewhere in India. So now let's say that somewhere down the line, I have some error, some issues occur, and not all of my commands enter the Indian server. In that particular scenario, some of the balances are updated, some of the balances are not updated, right? So I would like us to be able to roll back all of the updates that we have made so that we can make new updates afresh, right? So that is what I mean by transactions. So transactions allow us to consolidate or basically combine multiple things and say that these set of instructions are going to be done as a unit. Basically, that is what I mean by atomic instructions. These instructions are to be completed as a whole or none at all. Right. So databases also need to maintain certain features that allow us to maintain databases in a distributed fashion. So you would imagine that uh, in general, if we talk about databases, the first thing that comes to mind is we have a database somewhere or in your computer, and then basically we are updating it. But imagine Facebook or Amazon or things like that, who are maintaining databases of everything, right? So your usernames and passwords are the least of it, but they also have other data values included, right? So if I want to make some changes to it, those changes need to be transactional. That means all or nothing. And it also means that it needs to be divided out or separated out to all other databases that across the world where they have their database servers. So later down the line, if you move to France, you do not want to open your Netflix account and see that nothing is there. You still want to be able to view everything that is in their France server. And that France server needs to be completely updated to whatever is the information in the US server. Right. So that has to be kept in mind as well. Okay. So you don't need to worry about those things. That is basically a topic for distributed database systems. This class basically deals with designing your own databases and how do we go forward with it. But these are things that we need to keep in mind as well. Okay, so SQL. So SQL language basics. Firstly, SQL is case insensitive. If you have a table name, that table name can be written as the first case, first letter is capital case, or all of those are lower cases, or you can have alternating capital and lower cases. SQL does not really mind. MySQL really does not mind. But basically, you can have things like the account database can be written as, and let me just type, let me use a notepad. So basically the account database can be written as this or this or this as well. So SQL is case insensitive. All of those three things mean the same thing, but please try not to do this. Okay. You can put in comments. So right now we are going to talk about singular commands in your SQL codes, but later down the line, we will talk about writing scripts for SQLs. And so for that, you can actually write in comments for your SQL code as well. Single line comments are usually would usually have a leading two double dashes, and mostly SQL commands use these C style comment lines. So that is star, dash star, and star forward slash. If in this class, we will be using a Python based database communication tool so that we can write code in Python that would interact with a database. So in that scenario, we can also use Python comment lines as well. So that is your hashes and pounds. Okay. Okay, so SQL relations are contained within a database. So you install SQL, and basically your current SQL installation might have different databases, right? Every database can have multiple tables. Remember when we talked about your account relations, right? So account, loan, borrower, depositor, we had those four tables. All of those four tables would belong to the same database. So for example, it would belong to the same database called bank. So a particular database would have multiple tables inside. So you can maintain a database for bank, you can maintain a database for libraries, you can maintain a separate database for Wichita State students, right? So individual databases would have their own tables. Those tables might be connected to each other in terms of primary keys, blah, 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 and those things. But individual databases are separated from each other, right? So if we want, we would like applications to connect to our database and then work with something. However, we would also want several applications to work with a particular same database. That is, several applications work with the same bank database. Or we would want each application to work with multiple databases as well. Right. So for example, let's say that we have a database of, I don't know, student records, right? And we have a database of student completion criteria, right? So the things that you need to complete, your plan of studies, blah, 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 your things, all of those things. I would like to have a program that would select the student database that would get me the grades of individual students. And I would also like the database that deals with the administrative stuff for those students. And then I can decide that whether this student is legitimately going to graduate or not. Right, so I can actually manipulate multiple databases, or multiple programs can actually work with a single database. So for a library system, I can actually have a different program to calculate, I don't know, amount of money required uh, for late fees and the books that are there, things like that. Blah. You can think of examples like that, right? So if we want to create a new database in MySQL, we would use the term create database and your database name. So create database bank creates a new database called bank and followed by a semicolon. That is pretty much similar to you. The semicolon is pretty much similar to your C++ class. And then we would say use bank. So we created a database and we said that use this particular database. I would be giving you hands-on examples next class, but for now, just remember how these terms work, right? So when we say use bank, we are saying that by default, we are going to use this particular database. So we can say that we can have different databases. For example, let's say we have a bank database and a library database, right? So if we don't say use bank, that means that we don't have a default database. Then we can say that, okay, access the account table from bank. How do we say that? Bank.account. Or access the student name student table from library. So library.student, right? So we can say that we can access a particular database using those terms. Or if we want, we can directly say that by default, we are going to use bank. So just say account and that works because we said use bank and that accepts the default values. Okay, so DDL and DML operations will be evaluated in the context of the connection's default database, right? So if we say create a new table, if we have a default database, that new table is going to get created in the default database that we have. Okay, any questions so far? Again, stupid questions are fine. I want you to ask stupid questions. And some webcam videos, please, except Angelina.
Will
Somebody else.
the
Yes.
will the bank be also sensitive for capital letter or lower cases?
Very good question. Yes, so for bank, uh, okay, so that is a loaded answer. So yes, when we create a database in MySQL, it is case insensitive. Capital B, lowercase a does not matter. Whatever you have, capital N. Every time you access bank, you can mix and match your cases. However, some database implementations have case sensitivity. And even in MySQL, we can set a flag that will make sure that case is sensitive. but by default, MySQL does not check for cases. Does that make sense? How?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Is it just a convention to capitalize keywords like create and right? Good question, Justin. All the key. So Justin is asking, is it convention to capitalize the words create and use and database and things like that? So all the keywords that we are going to use, at least in MySQL, they have to be in capital letters, right? Different database implementations might allow you to change their cases, but in general, SQL wants you to have those keywords in caps. Does that make sense? So create, database, use has to be in caps. Okay. Any other questions? And webcams, please, one more at least. Thank you. For MariaDB, Taha, it follows the same. So remember, for MariaDB is essentially a complete copy of MySQL. Whatever we do in MariaDB is the same as what we do in MySQL. And for both of those, we need to maintain caps for keywords. MySQL is also free for developers and students, and we can use it. I just like to use MariaDB because it's an open source implementation for MySQL. MySQL is not free for enterprises. Me no like. Okay. Thanks, Eric. Okay. Moving on. So now that we have created a database, we would like to create tables in our databases, right? So we have our database that would contain multiple tables, and we would like to create our first table inside our database. So the syntax for creating our own table. So for example, in our bank database, we would like to create an account, a borrower, a depositor, loan, all of those are different tables. Remember that tables are basically relations. The things that we talked about as relations, those were those values, those are basically synonymous with tables here. SQL calls them tables. So create table T, where T is the name of your table. Then we have attribute name and the domain of your attribute. Attribute name, domain of your attribute separated by commas, and then we have semicolon at the very end. So that is the syntax for creating the schema of a new table. So this basically creates the schema of your table. So for example, let's get an example. So creating a new table that is account would be create table account, account ID, domain ID, branch name, domain type, balance, domain type, right? So account ID, domain type, branch name, domain type, balance, domain type. So this essentially creates the schema of your table. Remember that this does not create any rows for your table. It just gives you the blueprint of your table. Okay. Any questions about this one? This just creates a blank empty table. So in general terms, when we are talking about naming tables, remember that tables and columns require names. So our columns are usually our attribute names, and our tables